Hi, my name is Hamprecht, and this is the pattern recognition lecture. I'm a group leader here in image processing at Heidelberg University, and this is a course taught to physics students from the university, graduate students. However, we're making this available on the web on the hope that it might be useful to others. Now, actually the first 15 minutes are re-recording because we had an audio problem in the original first lecture. And this is why you are now spared the copying by hand of my first slide. I'm usually writing down things by hand because there are multiple ways to your brain, and one of them is through your wrist by actually writing things. And this is why I'm actually writing everything for the students to copy down. Now, the area, depending on your religious beliefs, has a variety of names. I call it pattern recognition, but people, especially from the business world, refer to it as data mining or knowledge discovery in databases. Others call it machine learning, or statisticians would say they've been doing this all of the time, and it's just multivariate statistics. Now, whatever you call it, it is, I think, the art and science of exploring data, and one way to do that is by means of visualization. To discover patterns, new patterns in your data, patterns that you were not previously aware of. This is the area or the subject of unsupervised learning, for instance, cluster analysis, which tries to find natural groupings in data. And one important target is to automatically learn rules. So you're given a training set, training data, and you want to find those rules that will, once you've found them, allow you to make valid predictions based on features or measurements that you have for your objects. So altogether, the target is here to turn data to knowledge. Why is this such an interesting area today? Because people have been clamoring. So this is people, and they've been clamoring for data all along. This is data. This is an old German fable, der Zauberlehrling. And we're now in the situation that people wanted data, and now they have it. And now they have the next problem of actually figuring out what to do with it. And this is where pattern recognition can help. More specifically, I show you here a list of applications. It is important, for instance, in industry, where one thing you want to do is control quality of objects. This is sometimes purely for aesthetical reasons. So if you pay a lot of money for your new smartphone, you want to make sure it doesn't have any scratches on it. But beyond just what is pleasing to the eye, there's also the issue of are these things working or not. So you would rather have all your soldering connections in the mobile phone working rather than not. And this would be extremely boring and tedious to do all of that with manual inspection. So this is where you would like to have a machine that automatically checks the quality of things. So you would acquire a couple of measurements, could be images, could be other data acquired by sensors, and then make a prediction as to whether the part is going to be functional or not. In, let's say, the refinement industry, there's process control. So you want to know, is your process running as it should or not? Sometimes you want to recognize objects, to grab objects, etc. Then there's the automotive sector. Subject of much current interest is pedestrian detection. You want your car to be able to recognize a pedestrian that you as a driver missed, and to brake and avoid overrunning the pedestrian by means of algorithms that are hooked onto a camera that sits somewhere in front of your car. Simpler decisions are simply whether to inflate the airbag or not. It can be life-saving in a serious crash, but it can also hurt the driver, especially if you inflate it in a minor crash that would otherwise not have hurt you at all. So you have this binary decision of whether there is an airbag or not as a typical example of a classification problem. Then, because we're in physics here, all important in physics is the question of whether what you're looking at is a real event or whether it is just background, so whether it's just noise, not the thing that you were looking for. In astronomy, there are nowadays very, very large sky surveys producing hard disks full of data, and nobody has the time to sift through these by hand. So this is where you want pattern recognition techniques, both in the exploratory and the confirmatory setting. Then biology has developed tremendously in the last few years and has become one of the most data-intensive sciences. So people now perform UHT, ultra-high throughput experiments, acquiring millions of images that nobody can look at by hand. And this is an area that we're actively working on. In medicine, there are systems that can help you make correct diagnosis, for instance. In finance, you want to make sure, so somebody paid something in New York yesterday, and somewhere a very long distance from that the next day, and in yet another place the next day. So you want, as a credit card company, you want to establish, is it likely or is it not? Is this a fraud or not? And rather than inventing these rules by hand, you now try in pattern recognition to extract them from historical data. So you have a whole record of where did people collect money from, and in which cases did they file for a fraud, and from that you try to learn rules. Then there's security, biometrics, and so on. Many, many applications. I'm showing you here a few examples that we've worked on ourselves. This is a welding cell, a welding robot, in fact. So this thing is being fed by a robot with one part of the other. You have a big laser gun here for the welding, and then a couple of high-speed cameras are looking right into the welding zone. And these are very fast cameras, though, so they acquire of the order of 40,000 images a second. And the welding takes a second, and you have 3 parts, 3 seconds until the next part comes in. And in these 3 seconds, you want to establish if the welding went all right or not. A classification problem. Again, the challenge here being learning this from, or setting up such a system with very few examples of wrong welds, because if your company runs well, you don't have many examples of things that went wrong. An example here from imaging mass spectrometry. So this is very high dimensional data. We're looking at a small tissue sample here, but in each pixel we don't just have an RGB, a red, green, or blue value, but we have hundreds of mass channels, and you try and make sense of this data with as little human interaction as possible. And I have an example from the field of connectomics. So this is the area where you take a very high resolution image, a 3D image of tiny parts of nervous system, and you try and pull this apart into all the individual pieces, which are, some of them are shown here and colored. And we're now looking at very, very large data sets with our collaborators, and nobody wants to trace these things by hand. It's doable, but it's not fun. So you would like to have an automated, accurate method that will segment this into all the individual regions or segments. And right now, humans, given enough time and money, are still better than machines. But I think this is a feasible problem, and I think in a few years we will have outrun the human in that kind of problem. Then ultimately, once you have all these segments and you've figured out what kind of contact they're making, you want to assemble this in a blueprint of the brain, in a circuit diagram. And well, this is something that we find very interesting, because the circuit diagram in itself will not tell you how cognition works, how the brain works, but it's hard to envision understanding the brain without having the wiring diagram. Okay, and if science doesn't motivate you, then perhaps money does. This is a website that Bernhard kindly has pointed out to me. This is a collection of benchmarks, and well, this list goes on and on. The most attractive one currently will earn you a lump sum of 3 million if you win it. By the way, if you participate, you have to, well, the condition is that you get these 3 million, but you also surrender your algorithm. Yeah, so you let them know what exactly you did. You still have, I took the snapshot today, so you still have 11 months, and you have to compete against only 932 other teams. And well, I looked at the leading algorithms, because people were, well, the board leaders, they were asked to publish what they've done to achieve their current best results. And to me, it was a little bit surprising that they had not put in any, so I only glanced at these papers briefly, but from what I gathered, they did not put in any expert knowledge at all. They just used the standard pattern recognition techniques that we will talk about this semester. However, they used a large collection. So they used not just one technique, but they trained many supervised learning methods and then averaged their results to make hopefully more reliable predictions. And apparently that worked quite well here. All right. So in terms of, I mentioned this exploring data and then discovering better patterns and learning rules. About learning rules, we will talk at greater length today. But as a mini preview, I want to show you a few slides about what people do in visualization or in cluster analysis. So typically, you characterize your different objects by measurements. So with this matrix here, I mean to symbolize that for each object, we have two measurements which you can plot as x and y and a scatter plot, and then you can look at your data and see that perhaps you want to develop a different model for these points down there as opposed to those. This works well if your data is two-dimensional. It also works fine if your features are three-dimensional. However, it breaks down when you have four or more dimensions. So what you do in that case, simple solution is that you can start plotting the first against the second, first against the third, first against the fourth measurement or feature. You know, it might go okay, let's say for up to 10 features, but if you have 10,000 features, you don't want to look at this matrix. And today's data, you have many data sets that have that large number of features. So you need to find other techniques of dimension reduction, which we will also discuss this semester, to deal with that kind of data. Then I've taken an example from the social sciences here. It's from Switzerland, actually. And it shows over time, from 1980 to 2000, how different communities have evolved politically. So there's politically right or conservative and left, or more, socially oriented, technocratic and ecological. So those are the axes. And you can see that over time, somehow the ecological people, perhaps because they grew older, they tended to become more conservative, whereas surprisingly the left people became more technocratic. And now you can interpret this, and all of this will be subjective, but it certainly is much easier to make sense of this data than to look at very, very large tables of numbers which are behind this animation. By the way, you see here the systematic difference between the German and the French-speaking part of Switzerland. So it really jumps at you, and this very clear distinction here. So this is what visualization is useful for. Then to give an example from cluster analysis, in an area called molecular dynamics, people integrate the Newtonian equations of motion over very long periods of time to study the behavior of proteins, the docking of biomolecules to receptors and such things. Here are images of a very, very tiny molecule only compared to those large biomolecules. And now when people integrate these equations of motions, they do so over hundreds of millions of time steps. And if you wanted to look at this, you could look at it as a movie, so how your molecule behaves and twitches over time, but it would be a pretty long and then also, a little boring movie. So it makes sense to try and summarize the movie into, what are the distinctive, repetitive elements that you see. So in this case here, out of such a very, very long movie, configurations that were similar amongst themselves were clustered, and then you can just look at these few typical configurations rather than at the many, many million that were sampled across the simulation. So this is where cluster analysis is useful. To give then finally an example for supervised learning, I will demo a tool that we're developing to demonstrate this process of giving labels, computing features, and making predictions that are hopefully valid. So I'm loading some data. I will actually take data that looks similar to the one that you saw before from this Connectomics example. This is a 3D data set, so these are 3 orthogonal slices. It is very, very high resolution data, so it is 5 nanometer isotropic resolution. The data comes from Graham Knott at the EPF in Lausanne. And, well, if we want to make predictions, we need a training set. In order to get this training set, we need features. I'm computing a couple of features here, and I'm not really commenting them now because it's pattern recognition and not an image analysis course. However, what I'm doing is that I'm now computing for each pixel a number of responses. So rather than just have this gray value for each pixel, I am now getting multiple numbers or a feature vector for each pixel, which holds information about the local environment of that pixel. Now we have the features for all 10 million or so pixels in this example, but to get a valid training set I also need labels. So I'm giving labels manually by saying that, for example, I'm using a very small brush now, so I could say this should be a membrane and that should not be a membrane. And this is, by the way, this is one pre-processing step for this classification that I eventually want to do, or for this segmentation that I eventually want to do. And now you see we're not very happy because this thing here is not a membrane, so I can tell it, look, this is not a membrane, and then our effort is in making these predictions or reaction to these updates very, very fast. So on the one hand, so what does it tell you, this example? On the one hand, that it illustrates the basic concept of a training set where we have features and labels. On the other hand, it shows you how quickly these predictions are possible nowadays. So at this stage here, we made predictions only for the few 100,000 voxels that you see. But as I go from one slice to the next, I have to make these predictions on the fly. So each time I move to a new slice, I make hundreds of thousands of predictions. And this is how efficient such prediction algorithms have become in the meantime. So as of now, these words probably don't mean much to you, except for the guy who said he wanted to learn about neural networks. All of these techniques aim to accomplish the several goals that I've sketched. And I have taken techniques that are really used and useful today. However, they have a different motivation or different people have arrived at them in different ways, and I want to give you also in this course the theoretical background behind these techniques. Small print, formalities, those who want to take part, they should do the exercises. You should get 50% cumulatively over all the exercises to be admitted to the oral exam, which will be at the very end of the semester. And we've started a little bit later today to give everyone the chance to arrive. Can everybody be here at 2 o'clock, or do you have some other course or something beforehand? In principle, I understand you can be here at 2 o'clock. Then we will start at 2 sharp. Okay. Then these exercises, they will be very closely coupled to what we do in the lectures. So typically you will have 1 week for the exercises, and they will address directly the topic that was treated in the lecture here. They will be practical exercises, so some very fundamental things I will ask you to implement yourself, and we have decided for MATLAB, which has some advantages, some disadvantages. One advantage is that it's a convenient language for rapid prototyping, and it's very widely used in industry. So there's a good chance that you may use it in your work later on. Disadvantage is it's pretty expensive if you want to buy a license for yourself. However, it is representative of some languages that are very similar, like Python, and once you've learned one of them, you will easily switch to one of the others. So in some cases, we will ask you to really implement things. In other cases, we will just ask you to use existing software or algorithms to look at some data. Yes? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, and then for those who want, if you find exercises boring, you can choose to do a project instead. I have a number of suggestions, and you can also make suggestions of yourselves. My definition of a project is to address an unsolved, possibly ill-posed, or perhaps even unsolvable problem with unknown outcome. This guy died. Yes, see, he's climbing here with no rope. Actually, he didn't die climbing. This is Güllich. He died in a car accident. Anyway, the point is that this is not the safe way to go. So the safe way is to just do the exercises. Unsolvable means if it turns out to be unsolvable, that's not your fault. Okay, so you won't flunk the project, but it means that the outcome may not be, as rewarding as one would ideally hope for. Altogether, this is exactly what research is about. What does it take to do research? Initiative, creativity, persistence, self-discipline, lots of frustration, tolerance. It's not a cheap way around the exercises. It's probably more work I think it's certainly more work than doing the exercises. Disadvantage is since you will focus on one thing, you will not deal with or you will not get first-hand experience of as many of the techniques as you would if you did the normal exercises. On the other hand, I always found it a little bit boring, during my studies, to do things of which the outcome was known. So for those who like to play around and do things by themselves and do something new, this is maybe a valid alternative. But altogether, these are lots of disclaimers, so you should be really convinced that you want to do that if you do that. Then for the rest of today, I will talk about k-nearest neighbors, which is a simple technique, and I want to introduce that as your first classifier. It will bring up some interesting questions that we will encounter again and again later in the semester. I will talk to you about the very, very basics of probability theory, so the things that you really need to know. I will talk, and I hope I will have time to finish that, about statistical decision theory, which is a principled way of finding good classifiers. So k-nearest neighbors is a good technique, but it's sort of, once we've discussed it, you will tell me you could have thought of this yourself. And, it is very intuitive, but who tells us that this is a good technique? And is there perhaps not a better one? And how would you prove which one is better? And statistical decision theory tells you about the ideal classifier. However, this ideal classifier will depend on a quantity that is impossible to estimate exactly. So it's a concept that is very important to understand, but which doesn't help you all that much in guiding you on a real life example. One thing. So why did I say that these supervised learning techniques are so much more objective? That is simply because in supervised learning, you can test your prediction performance. So whereas in visualization, people can argue, my algorithm makes prettier pictures than yours. In such supervised learning tasks, you can simply say, okay, I have a separate test set, and out of 100 examples, how many did you predict correctly, and how many did I predict correctly? And then you can still argue if the difference is statistically significant, but other than that, there's not much arguing possible. This is why supervised learning is more objective in the comparison of algorithms, and is probably also the reason why it's the most mature of these three areas. So there's that's the outline for the rest of the day, and at the very end of today we can figure out time and place for the, well, not the place, but the time for the exercises that will be convenient for all of you. I will always make a break after roughly 45 minutes, which is now,